Ugly is a term used to describe many things in the Star Wars galaxy, from the Gorax of Endor to Jabba the Hutt himself. And starships were no exception. From the wreckage left over from countless galactic battles, scoundrels, pirates, and anyone else who may fashion themselves as an engineer decided to take dismantled ship parts and create their own monstrosities. So today, we're going over them all. This is every single ugly Star Wars ship explained. Lancet Aerial Assault Craft. The Lancet Aerial Assault Craft is a ship designed by someone whose reference image was probably a Saiga antelope. Lancets are a blend of the TIE bomber and the Lambda-class assault transport, but it took the worst aspects of each ship to include in its design. It used the side pods of the TIE bomber and the body of the Lambda shuttle, even using its unfortunate sloped cockpit design. Fortunately, the Lancet was armed with a proton beam cannon mounted to its fuselage and was used primarily in air-to-ground attacks. Using the same tri-wing design as the Lambda shuttle, the Lancet used the solar array commonly found in TIE fighters. An even worse design component on the Lancet is the lack of shields, just like in most TIE models, which made them vulnerable to anti-aircraft weapons. X-TIE Fighters. Made out of the cannibalized parts of the classic X-Wing starfighter and a TIE fighter, the solar-plated panels of the TIE fighter replaced the classic S-foils of an X-Wing, while using the fuselage and engines of the iconic Rebel fighter. The weapons on this ugly ship were typically two laser cannons mounted on the fuselage. Since X-Wing lasers were mounted on the wings and the TIE fighter's lasers were on its chassis, there were no built-in lasers directly mounted on the X-TIE thanks to the combination of parts used. The proton torpedo launchers on the X-Wing's chassis remained, allowing for bombing runs to be made by this abomination. Like most other uglies on this list, this ship was barely space-worthy, able to be destroyed en masse by a single true starfighter. Scepter. Another ugly starfighter where the chassis is composed of an X-Wing body, the Scepter uses the solar panel components of salvaged Imperial TIE Interceptors rather than regular TIE fighters. The S-foils of the X-Wing were replaced by the solars of the TIE Interceptor, giving it enhanced maneuverability in comparison to the X-TIE. The addition of these solar panels also meant that the main weapons of the TIE Interceptor could be seamlessly incorporated into the Scepter's design. While not as efficient as the X-Wing or the TIE Interceptor, the recycled components made a better ship than most other uglies. They were also used more commonly than the X-TIE. As much as they could perform better than many ships on our lists, they were still an easy target for most other starfighters. Y-TIE. This fighter was built by replacing the standard engines of a Y-wing with the solar wings of a TIE fighter. The laser cannons from the TIE typically replaced the ion cannons standard for the Y-wing's turret. Neither fast nor maneuverable, it took some of the worst components of both ships to create it. That said, it was more durable than most uglies thanks to the use of the Y-wing chassis and the shields that came with it. TIE Wing. Another ugly taking inspiration from the Y-wing and TIE fighter, the TIE Wing was perhaps the most terribly designed starship to take flight. Instead of taking any strengths of either the Y-wing or TIE fighter, the TIE Wing took every weakness with nothing to remedy them. Known by names including the TIE Wing, Y-Ball, TIE Y, and more, it happened to be more standardized than most ugly starfighters. Rather than using the cockpit or fuselage of Rebel starfighters, the TIE Wing is the first ugly we'll cover that uses a TIE fighter's cockpit. From this, wing braces of the TIE fighter were attached to the engines of a Y-wing. Since the cockpit of the TIE fighter was being used, the main weapons of the TIE Wing were the attached TIE fighter laser cannons. Unfortunately, since the TIE cockpit was used, there were no shields and no hyperdrive. Pair that with being as slow as a Y-wing, many pilots playfully refer to them as die wings, thanks to its sluggishness and poor battle performance. Survivability in this thing was a near 0% chance. Clutch. Keeping with the theme of uglies using a TIE cockpit comes, in our opinion, the least ugly. The Clutch had a TIE fighter ball cockpit with ion engines and 3 triangular fins set 120 degrees apart from each other. This meant that the Clutch took the appearance of the TIE Phantom, just without the cloaking technology. With windows cut into the ball cockpit to give the pilot a better field of view, the Clutch was slower than the classic X-Wing, but had maneuverability closer to that of Interceptor-class fighters. Surprisingly, the Clutch was equipped with basic shields, granting it better survivability than even standard TIE fighters. Like other uglies with the ball cockpit, the main weapons for the Clutch were the 2 laser cannons mounted below the cockpit, but also had 1 laser cannon on the top fin, with the bottom 2 fins acting as the landing gear for the ship. Churdaki. Translating to Death Seed in the Twi'lek language, the Churdaki was an ugly starfighter assembled from a TIE fighter pod and X-Wing S-foils. Unlike other uglies, the Churdaki was actually built according to a Twi'lek design with little functional variation from one ship to another. The S-foils were attached to a gyroscopic mount on the main TIE pod. What does that mean? It means that the S-foils could rotate around the pod similar to how a Mandalorian Fang fighter's wings can rotate around its cockpit. The Death Seed used the twin ion engines of the TIE pod for propulsion, relying on the X-Wing parts for lasers, shields, and a hyperdrive. Having better maneuverability than a standard TIE fighter, these starfighters needed it because they had no life support systems, requiring the use of pressurized flight suits. The only firepower that the Churdaki could muster was from the X-Wing laser cannons, as any missiles or proton bombs were too difficult to acquire to incorporate them into the design of the ship. Scepter. Just because the term ugly referred to a class of starships, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the parts that made up an ugly were necessarily starship parts. Enter the Scepter. Some genius decided that the cockpit of an AT-AT would make for a starfighter-compatible cockpit, and somehow it worked. Albeit nothing much is known about this ship, but none of its components had any kind of shield compatibility, and the maneuverability of the TIE Interceptor parts would likely have been completely negated by the absolute brick that is the AT-AT cockpit. Somehow, the builders of this abomination happened across a full set of X-Wing thrusters, which also acted as the propulsion unit for this grotesque creation. How it ever flew is beyond our understanding, but I guess this is the Star Wars equivalent of when pigs fly. And it turns out, they do. ATL. You think that last one was bad? Check out the ATL. Instead of the cockpit of an AT-AT, this ugly has the head of an ATST as a cabin. Providing even less aerodynamic ability, the ATST actually has some decent firepower, or at least that must have been the thought process of whoever made this thing. Using X-Wing engines to propel itself, attached to the outside of a set of TIE wings, the main weapon of this abhorrent creation are the twin shin cannons present on the head of the ATST, Zceptor. If the rest of these ships are called uglies, this one is the poster child. Effectively made of whatever ship vomit was laying around, the Zceptor used the fuselage of a Z-95 headhunter effectively shoved through the front window of a TIE Interceptor. Don't worry, it gets worse. Since the fuselage of the headhunter protrudes through the body of the TIE Interceptor, the engines of the TIE can't be used. Instead, the dismantled headhunter engines are thrown on the inside of the solar panel interceptor wings. The Zceptor uses the main laser cannons of a Z-95 headhunter, but rather than being on the wingtips, the cannons are attached to the fuselage, just below the cockpit. In case there weren't enough parts mentioned, the ion cannon of a BTL Y-wing was mounted atop the interceptor hull. Afraid of being alone when you fly? Never fear. The Zceptor has room for an astromech counterpart in this mess of ship parts. That said, the astromech can only be mounted at the very front of this disgraceful ship. Ztai. Far less complicated than the previous entry while still using the main body of a Z-95 headhunter, the Ztai takes the same form as the X-Tai. With the same format of tie wings and weapons located on the main fuselage, the Ztai effectively shares its speed and maneuverability statistics with the X-tie. Z-wing. The Z-wing is one of the more tame entries on the list thanks to its combination of parts. Things here are far less complicated as the Z-wing uses the chassis of a Z-95 Headhunter, but the S-foils of an X-wing starfighter. Basically, this ship is an overcomplicated X-wing with similar statistics. Death Raven. Built from combining two B-wing starfighters around a large central cockpit, the mercenary-piloted Death Raven was able to have the two B-wing hulls rotate around it, boasting a greater firepower than both B-2 fighters combined. The ship measured at 32 meters long, had a Class 1 hyperdrive, and a strong deflector shield. The weapons that this thing had packing included 2 additional light ion cannons to accompany the previous 6 cannons present on both B-wings, 4 assault laser cannons, and 4 proton torpedo launchers, where each set of weapons was linked together. Not even some corvettes could boast a firepower equivalent to that of the Death Raven. Somehow, this ship could hold all of this weaponry while still being able to outfly and outmaneuver larger ships it attacked, making it possibly the most effective ugly ship on this list. Corellian B-wing. Sticking with the B-wing theme, this starship is noted as essentially just being flying junk and nicknamed the C-wing. This cobbled-together combination of a B-wing with a Corellian YT freighter cockpit. It was a last-ditch effort made mostly by pirates and smugglers to make a machine capable of flight out of scrap. B-wings are already some of the least maneuverable ships in the galaxy, so adding an extra bulky attachment like a freighter cockpit doesn't necessarily do wonders for this already struggling starship. This vessel was only to go up against lightly shielded targets, but even then, this ship was less than a match in a dogfight, let alone heavier shielded targets controlled by actual pilots. ATL Interceptor. If King Kong had a starship, this would be it. Used by the Fromm gang for planetary defense in 15 BBY, its design was later used to create the Defender starfighter for the New Republic. This ship had 3 laser cannons, 1 in the nose and 1 on either side beneath each wing. The Defender was supposedly one of the faster ships in the New Republic fleet, being faster than both the Y-wing and Z-95 Headhunters. Admittedly though, that's not much of a benchmark to make considering the Y-wing was one of the slowest ships in the Republic fleet. The thing that makes this starfighter one of the more visually disturbing features is the extendable S-foils. These struts were able to retract into the space frame, but supposedly, when engaged, the struts would swing down to give the ship better positioning for maneuverability. But during in-atmosphere battles, sudden fast movements could tear the struts clean off the ship's frame, making it possibly one of the worst design decisions the New Republic could make. Pursuer-class enforcement ship. Why have 2 wings if you could have 1? That's the philosophy used to create the Pursuer-class enforcement ship. Becoming popular by Mandalorians during the Clone Wars, the Pursuer was eventually made available as a police craft across the galaxy during the time of the Galactic Empire. For some reason, Mandalorians seem to top the list of the ugliest ships despite also having some of the most sleek and elegant ship designs in their arsenal as well. Even Boba Fett used a modified Pursuer-class starship named Slave 2, which was nearly destroyed when it crashed into a planetary defense shield. The Pursuer looks like a toolbox turned spaceship, focused on durability over speed and a reinforced hull for resisting blaster fire. Finally, an honorable mention. Literally anything from the Yuuzhan Vong fleet. They all just look like flesh-covered starships, which, in a sense, they are. Everything piloted by the Yuuzhan Vong is living, which adds more depth to their grotesque nature. But if you had the chance to create your own ugly starship, what would it look like? What parts would you use? Were there any ships that we missed? Let us know in the comments.